Hey, Josie with Queen My Pawn. Today I'm going to discuss different tactical themes to solve mate in twos. For example, there could be checks, which should always be considered first above everything. You could also do captures and then threats. Now, threats becomes more vague, and in here is where we can find the different types of tactical themes that we can create. And sometimes there's another one where you have to make a waiting move, as in to pass the move to the other side. Because if it were their move, then any move that they make would be losing. So in other words, creating Zugzwang. Let's take a look at a few of them. And here I am. We're using the book by Laszlo Polgar. So 319. I could give you 3 seconds to pause the video and try to find it out for yourself. I guess we could go left and right. So 1, 2, 3. Okay. So I would always start by looking at the checks. And by looking at the checks, we can see and force any coercion. We can coerce the other side to do something because checks are the most forcing move. We have a check by queen takes g5, but the king will take us back, so that wouldn't work. We have another check with queen e4, but they could just block with the rook, and then we try to check again. They could just block with the rook again. And finally, we have the check on e1. We also have a check on b4, but that's worse than e4. We have a check on e1, which is interesting. The rook can still block you, but here the king is also attacking the rook on g3. So queen takes g3 is checkmate. And the king cannot run backward or to the right because it's illegal. So the king has to run towards g4, but now you give a check on e4. So all I did here was look at all the checks. Now in 322, the situation is a little bit different. So I'll give you another 3 seconds if you haven't already to pause the video and try to find it out for yourself. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so here it looks like any check would be bad because our queen would be captured. If we try making a waiting move, such as with the queen, such as queen e1, that does pass the move. So for example, if you see that all the checks are bad in this position, which they are, look at what happens if black moves. Black can only move their pawn, and then you would play queen to g2. So that would be terrible. Let's see. The piece that can make a waiting move, because it's the least powerful piece, relatively speaking, is the king. So if we try king to f2, they may move their pawn to h2, but in that case, queen to g2 is possible. If they move their king to h2, then queen takes knight. So that would actually work. And that's how you make the waiting moves with the king. Looking at 320 and 323, try to find both of them, and I'll pause the video again. 1, 2, 3. And by pause the video, I meant you should pause the video, not me. Okay, so 320. Always start by looking at the checks. First of all, I see that we've created a border here on e3 and e5 with the knight. There's also a border on e2 with the king. But it doesn't look like the queen will be able to checkmate by itself because black doesn't look like it's smothered in an epaulet like I've discussed before. So it looks like we might have to change things up by moving the position of the knight, for example. Let's say knight to e5. The king has to go to e3. It's forced. and then queen to f2 mates, because it covers the dark squares and the knight covers the light squares. So that's how you know that you're on the right path, when you got the queen and the knight on the same color, because at that point you should remember that the knight controls the opposite color that it's on. So if the queen and the knight are on the dark squares, the queen controls the darks. If the queen and the knight are on the dark squares, the queen controls the darks and the knight controls the lights. And if the queen and the knight are on the light squares, the queen controls the lights and the knight controls the darks. That's how you know you're on a good path. So 323. I see that there's a barrier on the 4th rank. And so it's like if the king is on the 1st rank and you got a knight here and a queen, clearly knight to d5 forces the pawn to move or the king to move. So we're forcing. I did consider checks here, such as queen to b7, of course, but the king would escape to c5 and it escapes towards the right side of the board, and I don't like that too much. So but obviously it has to be a waiting. For example, if it were black to move, black has no legal moves except for the pawn. And so, for example, b6, and it will be checkmate after queen to e5. But maybe another pattern could be done. Knight to d5. That forces the king onto b6, and then queen to b6. Or if the pawn moves, then just queen takes b6 anyway. So here it's you either have to look at the waiting moves, and if you don't have any waiting moves, which you don't here, then you have to change the pattern of the position, which I did by moving the knight. Same thing in 321 and 324. So let's see what we can do here. 3 seconds to pause the video and try to find it out for yourself. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so 321, checks really don't work in this position because the knight it would be unprotected. But I do see that king to c3 is almost stalemating the king. The king has to go to a1 and then queen to b2 checkmate. If the king doesn't want to move, then the pawn moves to c4 and then queen to b2 checkmate in either way. So it's just about knowing the checkmate pattern here. Yep. 324. Again, we may have to change the checkmating pattern here. And it resembles a hookmate, actually. Knight to e6. The king has to go to either h6 or to f5, and either one is bad. If king to h6, then queen to h4, Anastasia mate, sort of, except it's not really Anastasia because it wasn't done with a rook. But you can imagine that there's some obstruction on g5, like a knight and a rook on h4, and that's Anastasia mate. If the king goes to f5, then it's a hook mate, except that the king is not a king, it's a pawn protecting the knight, and so it prevents the escape towards the light squares above. And the knight protects the queen on f4. So that's the different strategies that you can use. You can coerce, you can pass the move to black, which is a waiting move, and or you could change the mating pattern of the pieces. So in that order, you should consider them. Again, look for all the checks, and if nothing looks reasonable, go on to waiting moves, and if nothing looks reasonable there, then change the mating pattern. And that's it. Hope you liked the video. Make sure to subscribe to queenmypawn.com, or Queen My Pawn the channel, or visit queenmypawn.com, the website. Thanks for watching.